Now, I'll be very clear when making this statement. This ain't the outcome that anybody back in that time frame would have wanted. But it's one that, with the benefit of hindsight, we might actually say was the best move possible. I'll tell you why in a few seconds here. Today we're talking about Vancouver Canucks' supposed superstar turned bum turned decent contract, if not an okay contract, Elias Pettersson, and the idea of what could have happened if the Canucks actually traded Pettersson away years ago, before his slump, in exchange for then Carolina Hurricanes forward Martin Necas. Now, this is all coming to us because of a post made on CanucksArmy.com, or excuse me, not Canucks Army, it's Daily Faceoff Vancouver. That's the new name of Canucks Army. They are rebranding, or they have officially rebranded away from the Canucks-related names. But Daily Faceoff Vancouver's Steven Rodgett went out there and posted this piece earlier last week. Where might the Canucks be if they had swapped Elias Pettersson for Martin Necas back in 2024? Now, I assume, if you're talking about 2024 Elias Pettersson trade discourse, you're probably talking about what Petey was up to halfway through the 2024-2025 campaign. A season where Pettersson had 45 points in 64 total games, a big drop-off from the 89 points he had the year prior. Literally, he halved his point production and was 2 years removed from scoring 102 points as well. Pettersson was on top of the world at the end of 2023 and for the first half of the 23-24 campaign. Things started to slow down for him around January-February, where knee tendonitis started affecting his game. Although people in the audience, folks analyzing Pettersson in the media, they all said, oh, it's because of the contract talks. It's because of the extension that's looming over this guy's head like an angel's halo. That's why Pettersson isn't doing all too well. But guess what? In the midst of 2024, he ended up signing his contract. He finished the year with 89 points, and then was a total dud for the Stanley Cup playoff run that the Canucks went on. 1 goal in 13 games. Then the next 2 seasons happened, and the rest was history. It was around the December period of 2024 when Elias Pettersson was linked to Carolina in a trade that could have seen Martin Necas come over to Vancouver. Necas is a guy who was taken just a few picks after Elias Pettersson in that 2017 NHL Entry Draft, and he was a player that totally dominated the Carolina Hurricanes system the year before getting traded. He had 71 points in 82 games played, and that was seen as an anomaly season. We didn't think that Martin Necas was capable of doing that until he did it. The season after, he ended up not producing as many points as before, but he was still somewhat of a commodity on the trade market. This was compiled with some contract extension disputes. Of course, we know that Carolina, be it as it may, they ended up winning the Stanley Cup this year. They have been a very difficult team to pry money out of. And that was the issue with Martin Necas. He wanted more dough. It just wasn't coming to him. The Hurricanes didn't believe that he was really this 71-point guy. And so he was dangled around in trade talks. And this included a potential deal which could have seen Necas go over to Vancouver in a Pettersson swap. He ended up not going to Vancouver. He went over to Colorado instead. And this previous season, he posted up 100 points in 78 games. Say what you want about him playing with McKinnon and Cale Makar and all these guys, but he was the Mikko Rantanen replacement, and he ended up fulfilling that duty. He also was way over a point per game for Team Czechia at the Olympics, and he was a point per game guy in the Stanley Cup playoffs for Colorado too. Although you can say that going from 38 goals to 1 goal in a playoff run isn't really the best. You can definitely acknowledge the quality of Martin Necas' production in the postseason, even though he still was a point per game. With that said, the Rajat piece goes out there and describes a lot of the same things that we had just talked about over here. The 2024 trade deadline saw the Canucks with a difficult decision on their hands. Pettersson was a pending RFA at the end of the year, and negotiations on an extension were more than a little contentious. At that time, Pettersson was 25, he had come off a 102-point season, and more than that, by March 1, he was already up to 75 points in 62 games. This was, as it would turn out, peak Pettersson. Now, we all understand that the Canucks ended up signing Petey to the contract that he got, and then he started to disappoint immediately afterwards. But before they got that contract done, they seemed to be seriously considering trading Pettersson instead, with the most rumored destination being far and away the Hurricanes, and the most rumored return piece would be Martin Necas. So, this article is saying that even though Pettersson was in the midst of contract talks, there were still trade discussions going about with Martin Necas as the subject in Carolina. What would have happened if Necas came over to Vancouver and played with the Canucks in that 2024 playoff run at the trade deadline? That is what Rajat goes out there and asks about. It would have been a complicated transaction as the two players held different values at the time. Clearly, the Hurricanes would have had to include some extra pieces with Martin Necas. It's tempting to say the Canucks would be a lot happier today if they made a trade like that. Just on production alone, early 2024 happened to be the point where Pettersson's career began to decline, and it was just ahead of Necas's own ascension. Since then, the numbers are quite stark. Since the day he had signed that extension on March 1st, Pettersson has scored 110 points in 158 games. Necas, meanwhile, 194 points in 179 games across the same span, including a 100-point season. Necas, however, is not a perfect asset. He has been criticized before for inconsistent play, and an occasionally lackluster defensive effort. Often stylized as a center, Necas plays almost exclusively on the wing these days, Nathan McKinnon's wing, no less. And eventually, he came with his own massive extension, an 8-year, $11.5 million AAV deal signed in October 2025 that'll take him until the age of 35. Now, let's go out there and skip out on Rajat's analysis on what the Canucks could have been like had a Necas trade been completed, and instead we'll go over on the Twitter, because Daily Faceoff Vancouver has some pretty interesting things over here. The top reply from Leo Sayerpa says, the Vancouver Canucks would have won the Stanley Cup in 23-24 with Shilovs pulling a Ken Dryden, winning a cup, and a Conn Smythe as a rookie. JT, Hughes, and Tocchet would still be in Vancouver. Lindholm and Zadorov would take discounts to stay. The team makes so much money. They build a practice facility. Homelessness and poverty fixed. Good times. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that Martin Necas would have solved homelessness in Vancouver. The downtown east side could use your help there, Marty. But I'm not necessarily discrediting how far the Vancouver Canucks could have gone in the Stanley Cup Playoffs in 2024 with Martin Necas instead of Elias Pettersson. This guy was just on the cusp of fully breaking out and becoming a 100-point player just a few years later, a point-per-game stud in the Stanley Cup Playoffs. Meanwhile, Elias Pettersson, he didn't do anything in that Stanley Cup playoff run. Half a point a game in totality and 1 goal in 13, where I think he shot it at a wide-open net and it ended up just going in. Pettersson was not an impact player against Nashville in round 1, nor Edmonton in round 2, an Oilers team that, by the way, was able to claw back and win 3 straight in the Stanley Cup Finals, only to lose in Game 7 versus Florida. Necas, I'm not saying he would have put the Canucks over the edge and would have made Vancouver better than that Oilers team, but he certainly would have been better than Pettersson, who was just declining at the exact same time. So, do the Vancouver Canucks win the Stanley Cup in 23-24? Does Artur Shilovs get over his weakness of long shot goals against? Would JT Miller and Quinn Hughes still be in Vancouver? What about Lindholm and Zadorov? What about the practice facility? Where would the Canucks have been if they had traded Pettersson for Necas at the 2024 trade deadline? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.